Almost every country in the world is in debt. The United States has a debt of $38 trillion, while Japan has $9 trillion. The total global debt is approximately $315 trillion, which is about 3 times the size of the global economy. But the real confusing question is this: if everyone is in debt, who is all this money owed to? The answer is not what you think. When you follow the creditors, when you investigate who actually holds the debt, you notice something disturbing. The world is not actually in debt to a single person or institution. The world is essentially in debt to itself. But over 3 centuries, 4 bankers deliberately built this system. They constructed a structure where debt can never be fully paid off. Governments are constantly borrowing, interest keeps rising, and those who design the system profit from every payment, every crisis, and every bailout package. And when you understand how they built the system, you realize that $38 trillion is not a problem, but rather exactly how the system is supposed to work. Now let me explain the 4 architects who built this system and how the debt trap was constructed. Before 1694, kings borrowed money from merchants or nobles and promised to repay it with interest. If they failed to do so, they defaulted. In other words, they could not pay the debt, and the lenders would lose money. This system was risky, but limited. Debt was either repaid or erased. Then William Paterson changed everything. England was at war with France. King William III urgently needed money. The treasury was empty. Taxes were not enough, and no one wanted to lend money because England had defaulted before. Paterson proposed a deal. Wealthy merchants would lend a large sum of money to the state, but this debt would never be repaid. Instead, the state would pay interest forever. To manage this system, a new institution was created, the Bank of England. The system worked like this: merchants deposited their gold into the bank. The bank lent this money to the government. The government paid interest every year. The bank distributed this interest to investors, but the principal amount was never repaid. This was the first time in history that government debt became permanent. Then Nathan Rothschild came and expanded the system. Government debt was turned into something that could be bought and sold among investors. In other words, debt became a global, tradable market product. This meant debt was no longer tied to one lender. Instead, it was spread across a complex system. Now, if a country failed to pay its debt, it would not just affect one person, but the entire financial system. This forced governments to always repay their debts. In the early 1900s, J.P. Morgan entered the picture. In the United States, a system similar to a central bank was created, the Federal Reserve, Fed. With this system, the government could borrow money by creating new money whenever needed. In short, debt no longer had a clear limit. In 1979, Paul Volcker sharply raised interest rates. This put serious pressure on developing countries, and many of them became unable to pay their debts. But the debts were not erased. Instead, the IMF stepped in and provided new loans to keep the system alive, meaning the debt continued to exist. In return, countries were required to cut government spending, sell off certain state assets, make their economies more liberal and open. In short, the debt did not disappear. It only changed form and became permanent. Today, we are at the point where the world has a total debt of $315 trillion. This debt is mostly spread across governments, corporations, individuals. But the system is the same. debt is constantly rolled over, and interest is constantly paid. In conclusion, debt is not actually a problem. It is the foundation of the system, and interest is the price of living within this system. And those who benefit the most are the financial institutions that control the debt.